Can I take
Yeah,
this?
you go ahead.
It's
Okay, sorry for the delay. Something weird happened with the Zoom link. For some reason. Oh, I know what happened. Okay, now I see it. All right, I had it on recorded. So as a result, I got mixed up. Okay, so anyway, we'll get in. We're going to continue today with the discussion of emotions and diversity, and I'm going to talk a little bit about writing stuff. I had meant to do that, and I didn't get around to it. So that's what we'll do. And with the remaining time, I think there'll be some remaining time. We'll start talking a little bit about interpersonal skills, which we'll get into in greater detail next class, because that's the next subject is on emotion and interpersonal skills. So I had sent an email around when you did your discussion boards, and I pointed out a few issues that I wanted to talk about when we about concerning your writing. And I know it's hard for a lot of you are ESL students, and you know, I've grappled with learning foreign languages myself and haven't really been successful. So I know it's really hard, but it's important to learn English if you're going to work in the city. You know, usually people understand if you're ESL, but the stronger your English is, the more you can do. I think basically the professionals I've dealt with in my life, the best writers were actually the lawyers. And journalists are good, you know, very good writers, but lawyers are actually better. And after the lawyers, and also I would say about lawyers, the high profile lawyers like the White Shoe law firm lawyers are better writers than, like, you know, the average lawyer. You know, there's a big difference if you're a lawyer who gets employed by corporate America to defend cases, you know, lawsuits. But the average lawyer is much below. So in other words, it's the top lawyers who are really good writers. The average lawyers are still pretty good. Corporate people are also, like, especially when I was at Johnson & Johnson, I was very amazed at their emphasis on writing. They wanted me to take some writing classes, actually. And then academics are actually, of the people I've dealt with, among the worst writers, you know, so it's not a place to get good writing advice, you know, colleges, unfortunately. And part of the reason is there's a lot of emphasis put on, like, technical language in universities, and basically when you write, you want to be simple and clear. So I think I've already told you that you should limit your sentences to one main clause and occasionally two, but if you totally limit it to one main clause, so you only use one main clause per sentence, you're better off than if you write longer sentences. I'm not saying that the best writing is restricted, that every sentence is a main clause. But if you limit your sentences, so you avoid compound sentences and you avoid subordinate clauses and just have main clauses, that's actually going to be better than what a lot of people in the class do now. So I'm not saying to do that, but I'm just saying that you want to have shorter sentences. So keep looking at your sentences. And one of the problems that a lot of ESL students have, and I see this with English first people too, is subject verb number agreement. And that's easy to fix. I mean, if you've memorized the verbs and the personal pronouns, it's not hard to make the match. So it's just something you need to check every time. So if you say the large number of students says that work will start, that's wrong. What you want to do is say the large number of students say. So, the plural of most verbs in English doesn't end in S. It's a little confusing because the plurals of the nouns end in S, but the plurals of the verbs don't end in S. Whereas the singulars of the verbs don't do end in S, whereas the nouns, and pronouns don't end in S. Okay. Oh, well, I'm not sure what happened. Yeah, I got here a little late, to be honest. So I was 4 or 5 minutes late. So basically, I let people in a little bit late, but I'm not sure why you'd be 10 minutes late. That I don't know, but I didn't take attendance anyway, so I don't worry about it. So anyway, getting back to the writing stuff, you do want to make sure that the number of the pronoun and the verb match. Also, in a number of cases, people were mashing two main clauses together. So if you have a verb that doesn't follow a subordinate clause, the subordinate pronoun, a subordinating conjunction, I meant to say, it can't be you can't have more than one per sentence unless you join them. So like there was a guy who had like a 90-word sentence, and I'm putting this on the screen share. So it's I go to school, I like champagne, I run marathon, just making up things. You can't do that. You got to always punctuate the sentence. So it's very, very important when you're writing to capitalize the first letter of the sentence. Say, no one's going to understand. A lot of people are going to get confused. So you capitalize the first letter, you put a period, you break out the main clauses. These are all main clauses into separate sentences. And remember, the average English sentence is 15 words. So if your sentences are like 60 words, you gotta, cut that short. You gotta change it. And so I'm not saying, if you have some sentences that are 25 or 30 words, that's fine. But, simple counting of the words can tell you if you're doing something a little bit odd. Shorter sentences are fine. That's almost never a problem. But longer ones aren't. A number of people misuse the word would. I don't know why, but I've noticed this at Brooklyn College. It's fairly common. It may be like a regional mode of speaking, but if you say something like, when I graduate from college, I would be a chef. Okay, that's wrong. All right, would has some specific uses, and the future tense is not one of them. Or if you say, you could say, this would be, hello, are you Joe? And Joe says, yes, this would be Joe. Okay, that's wrong. All right, that's not correct English. And I'm not saying you're going to lose a job because you use that kind of expression, but you might. Especially if you're trying to get a job, in elite America. I'm not saying they'll definitely penalize you for that kind of language, but I would say you're gonna make life a lot harder for yourself than if you learn the right way. So be careful of the use of would. Now, when do you use would? You use it, would, you can look this up on the web. There's websites available. You can learn this better. You're not going to learn it just from one time. But anytime you use would, you should ask yourself, am I using it the right way? Is it correct English, or am I making a mistake? And the correct way to use would is that it's an unreal possibility. So if I were king, everyone would have chocolate. Okay, that's correct. Okay, so it's an unreal possibility. Everyone would have chocolate if I were king, but I'm not king, and no one's gonna have chocolate. All right, not everyone, anyways. So basically, you use would for unreal situations. You also use would for some specific reason. So if it's the past tense of will, so you say something like, when I was young, or something like this, you said that you would meet me, but then you didn't. Okay, so you said that you would meet me, but then you didn't. So that's like the past tense of will, and you can use it for that. And you can also use it for repeated actions in the past. So it's not that you're using it for will, but you're saying you did it a number of times. So you say, when I was in elementary school, we would throw spitballs. Okay, so basically, I don't know if you ever did that. The spitballs are like little pieces of paper that you throw at people. So if it's a repeated action in the past, then it's okay to use would. There are a few other important uses of would. So it's okay to use it for a polite request or a statement of wish. So you say, I would like to be a pilot. Okay, that's fine. Or would you please pass the butter? That's fine. But you shouldn't say something like, in 20 years, I would work in advertising. That's wrong. Okay, if you want to express a real future, then use will. Okay, I saw this in about 4 or 5 students posts, and I've seen this through, as I've corrected the writing here over the last 10 or years or so, maybe a little more than that. I'm not saying I didn't correct the writing before that, but I got a lot more careful about it about 10 or 12 years ago. And now I'm doing it a little less because I have too many students, but basically it's still important. Just because I'm not focusing on it doesn't mean it's not important. So those are, the use of would is important. A quickie is you shouldn't use the term, irregardless. Okay, I don't think I saw anyone do that, but it's bad, cross that out, never use that. What I did see, what was I gonna say? Well, I know. I did see a few people say things like in regards to the book. Okay, that's wrong. The correct term is in regard to the book. Okay, so you could say as regards. That's fine. It's a clause. As regards, it concerns as regards, but in regards, regards is not a preposition, so it's wrong. So basically, in regard to the book, as regards, with regard to the book, those are all okay regarding the book. But don't use in regards to the book. A number of people have done that in the essay. So I hit on a few points. I don't want to overwhelm you with this stuff. I'll talk about it on occasion. But basically, I think one of the really important issues that I saw in your writing is that a number of people, it wasn't just one or two, did not match the number of the verb to the noun or pronoun that preceded it. So you should always be careful of that people are going to notice that you do that. Okay, so that's enough for now. There were other issues. I sent around a few, and I'll get to some other ones. So that said,
Wait, can you explain what you mean by matching the number to the
of
verbs?
course, yeah, that's great. You asked that. So basically, let's say you say, my friends, which is it, Walker walks. Which is it? Anyone?
Walk.
Walk to school. Okay, you don't say my friends walks to school. Now, one area, while we're talking about this, one area is when there's a prepositional phrase or a relative clause that follows the subject, people often get confused. I do sometimes myself. So if you say something like, my friend from many schools walk to school. Okay, I don't know what that means, but just to give you an example. So what happens in a lot of cases is that you hear the number of the noun in a prepositional phrase that follows the subject, and you use that as the number. So you allow the schools to drive the number of the verb, and that's wrong. All right, so I sometimes make that mistake myself because you hear the plural and you're not thinking and you're writing quickly and you put the plural verb, but the subject is not schools. The subject is my friend. So can't do that. So it should be the singular verb. So in other words, if the subject is singular, the verb should be singular. If the noun doesn't have an S, the verb should have an S. If the noun has an S, then the verb shouldn't have an S. Okay. And you should always check. You should check every sentence for that. That's like, proofreading is a critical part of writing. All right. So, and everyone in the class, I mean, I don't care how new you are to English, you can check to see like if the noun, if the noun is singular, that the verb is also singular. So I run, they run. That's just how the verb is. Or I walk. It's not I walks. All right, something like that. So make sure that they match. And it seems obvious. I mean, it's not that complicated. It seems obvious, but a lot of people make that mistake. It isn't just one or two. So try to be conscious of that, and don't let the modifiers that follow the subject of the sentence change the number of the verb. That's a very important point. I'll talk about one more thing, and then let me think for a second what would be helpful. I think an area, I'm thinking what would have the most value added to talk about, and there are a lot of things, but one thing that comes to mind is how to use that versus which. It's a little bit subtle, and a lot of people don't understand this. In fact, it took me a long time to figure it out. And if you don't follow what I'm talking about, you can look it up. Pretty much anything I'm talking about is going to be covered in a basic grammar book. Strunk and White, Elements of Style is a good source. But basically, if you use a relative pronoun, or you want to write a relative clause, so relative pronouns are like that which, wherever, so they like introduce a relative clause. So a relative clause could be like, the boy who was elected president of the school got a good job. Okay, the relative clause is who was elected president of the school. That's the relative clause. And a lot of people, very few people, know how to punctuate those correctly. So the trick is that there's a trick to it. And if you can master the trick, it's simple. The trick is just that if you don't put in you never use just one comma. So you don't just say the boy who was elected to the school. If you put in one comma, you have to put in a second comma, unless it comes at the end. So if you put in one comma, you have to put in two, unless the relative clause comes at the end of the sentence and then the period replaces the comma. But if you leave out the commas, what you're saying is you're identifying the boy. Leaving out the commas means that the relative clause serves the role of identification. They call it restrictive clause. It restricts the meaning. It just means it identifies the noun. So, for example, if you if you say the president who resigned from office was Richard Nixon, that that who resigned from office identifies the one president out of whatever it is, 45 now, 46, whatever it is, identifies the one president who resigned from office. Okay. If you insert the commas, you're describing the noun. Okay, so the commas tell the reader, is the relative clause defining the noun, or is it describing the noun? If it defines the noun, then you leave out the commas. If it describes the noun, then you insert the commas. So you say, Professor Langbert, who teaches organizational behavior, discussed writing. Okay, now this is wrong, because if you leave out the commas, you're implying that there's two Professor Langberts or more, two or more Professor Langberts. And by leaving out the comma, you're saying you're identifying which Professor Langbert teaches organizational behavior. On the other hand, if you insert the commas, then that's consistent with there just being one, and you're just adding information about Professor Langbert. You're describing Professor Langbert. So the use of commas, and we don't really have time to go into it in depth, but this teaching in K-12 in New York, especially about, and I say that because I think the schools in New York aren't very good. The teaching about commas doesn't leave you, after you finish New York K-12, you don't know how to use commas, I'll put it that way. And then they never told you. And what you sometimes hear is that they're used to express a pause, or to set off an idea, or whenever you think they're necessary, or something like that. And that's all incorrect. There are a number of rules about how to use commas. They're fairly straightforward. Most of us don't get it perfectly, even if you're pretty good at writing. But if you start to familiarize yourself with what the rules are, your writing will become a little bit clearer. And this can be important. And that gets me back to what I was saying at the beginning. Like, why is it that the lawyers who represent corporate clients, in other words, the white shoe law firms, like the people who work for I once was a consultant to Jones Day, Rebus and Pogue, and I once worked with I've worked with a couple of them, a couple of the top 10 law firms. And why would it be that those guys or gals write so well? And if you think about it, when they file a legal brief, what they're usually doing is trying to save their client millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, sometimes even in the billions. And so there's a huge amount at stake. And so the clarity of their writing can have enormous economic consequences. And so, they take it very, very seriously. And the same is true in corporate America. If you're working on a problem that has enormous financial implications, you need to be clear. And so this is why I talk about writing. And a lot of people think, I've had colleagues who think that it's not a business issue. I've heard people say this, professors, and Yeah, I apologize too. I was a little late. I somehow got confused when I was signing on. Um, um, I've had colleagues who say, "Oh, it doesn't matter. It's not business people. Don't worry about." If you run a restaurant and it's a small operation, you're not going to need to write a lot. But there's often a joke about called greengrocer grammar. That if I Google that right now, greengrocer grammar, uh, it's like people who post signs. Um, yeah, here, like definition. Oh, that's another one I could have mentioned. Maybe I'll talk about that too in a minute. The apostrophe. So let me share the screen with you just so you see what the web says about the greengrocer's apostrophe. Uh, maybe that's what I was saying when I said greengrocer grammar, but it's more than just the apostrophe. There's often other things, but let me share the screen so you can see that. The greengrocer's apostrophe is that they confuse the plural with the possessive. Um, and so using the apostrophe before the final S in the plural form. So basically, that's a very common error that I see in school among you guys as well. I'm not saying any one individual, but I'm just saying I see in my classes a lot. And, it's very, very important, to understand the difference between the possessive and the plural. And a lot of people don't get it. A lot of people mix that up, so even, this thing with the greengrocer's apostrophe, it tells you that there are times when even if you own just a small store, the lack of grasp of basic grammatical principles can be an embarrassment. I'm not saying people won't go in your store because you got the grammar wrong, but there are going to be people who kind of laugh, and they'll notice it. So basically, let's look at the screen share again, and I'll just briefly do the greengrocer apostrophe, and remind you that plurals don't follow an apostrophe. I'm sure most of you are aware of this, but a section of the students have gotten this wrong. So if you say, for example, lions are scary, you don't put an apostrophe before lions. Okay. Now, if you're talking about multiple lions, so you've got 20 lions, the lions are scary. That's correct. But let's say the lion's dinner was red meat. Okay. Here you need an apostrophe after the S. Okay. So if it's a plural and you want to say the possessive, you put the apostrophe after the S. So if the line is singular, there's just one lion. Okay, then you put the apostrophe before the S. Okay, so it's very straightforward. Now, what's the difference between the dinner of the lion was red meat or the lion's dinner was red meat? Is there a difference? The answer is no. They mean the same thing. This is a little less neat, so I usually would say not to use that construction unless using the possessive creates confusion. Like one time when I would use of the, rather than the possessive, is if you've got multiple subjects, and it may be a little bit confusing to use the possessive, because the correct, if you have multiple subjects, for example, if you've got two writers, what you would do is something like this. Watson and Crick's discovery of DNA. That's correct. So you put the apostrophe S after the second one. You don't put it before the first one if it's a combination effort. Like the famous scientists Watson and Crick discovered DNA. They were the first ones to understand it about 70 years ago. And so you would only use the apostrophe S if they did it separately. Okay, so if what you're saying here is Watson's discovery and Crick's discovery of DNA, that would be okay if there was two separate discoveries. You could actually do that like with the invention of calculus, because Leibniz, the philosopher Leibniz, and Sir Isaac Newton discovered calculus at the same time, roughly, and they're usually both credited with discovery. So you could say Leibniz's and Newton's discovery of calculus, and that's good. But if you do it jointly, then you would say Rogers and Hammerstein's musical comedy. You know, they were like famous, they made famous Broadway shows. So basically, if you're using this sort of construction, it can get a little bit confusing at times. So you might prefer to say the musical comedy of Rogers and Hammerstein, or the discovery of Watson and Crick. All right, but basically be really careful when you're using possessives. I see this all the time. A number of students will not insert the comma or insert the comma when they mean a plural, and you don't want to do that. Okay, so that's good. So let's move on. I didn't take attendance yet. Who can see your messages recording on? I don't know what that means. Okay, so in any case, let's take attendance, and then we'll go on. We'll finish up the stuff on diversity. And I'm going to go over this writing stuff every once in a while. You don't get enough of it. I don't know what the solution to that is, because the schools, the high schools, and don't do a good job of teaching it, and we don't do a good job here. And you know, I've tried through the years to do a little bit, but with 140 students this semester, it's just absolutely impossible for me. You know, I have other obligations and so on, so I can't really do as good a job as I'd like. Okay, that said, Syed Abbas.
Here.
Okay. Syed Ahmad.
Here.
Hello. Samima Akhtar. Alessandro Alessi. David Batesh. Anam Bahati.
I'm here, Professor.
Hello, Anam.
Hi.
Melissa Calixto.
Here, good morning.
Good morning, Melissa. Winston Chan.
Hey, Professor.
Hey, Winston, your mic's a little soft, but I heard you. Bin Chen.
Here.
Hello, Bin. Kai Chen.
Here.
Kai?
Here.
Okay, hello. Jirui Deng.
Good morning.
Good morning, Ji. Farhan Aram.
Good morning, Professor.
Morning, Farhan. Brianna Faustin. Steve Feng.
Here.
Hello, Steve.
Oh.
Jonathan Gonzalez.
Here.
Hello, Jonathan. June Grant.
Here.
Hello. Minhao Hu.
Here.
Hello. Angelica Laborde. Angelica. Jian Lin.
Yeah.
Hello. Leon Liu. Leon. Elizabeth Maddox.
Good morning.
Morning, Elizabeth. Rochelle Mendez.
Here.
Hello. Demi Mullings.
I'm here.
Hello. Cameron Nahar.
I'm here.
Hello, Cameron. Nicholas Neglia.
Here.
Morning. Aquino Olivier. Aquino. Jenny Perfecto.
I'm here. Good morning.
Good morning. Chenille Pell.
Here, good morning.
Good morning. Anna Siddiqui.
Good morning, Professor.
Good morning. Winjin Turabov.
Here, Professor.
Good morning, sir. Jaron Walls. Yi Wen Wu. Yi Wen. Kristen Yip.
Hi, good morning, Professor.
Morning. Anita.
Here.
Hello. Zingran May. MEI May. Okay. Samima. I'm calling the people who I didn't answer the first time. Samima. Alessandro.
I'm here, Professor.
David.
Sorry, I just stepped away.
Okay.
Yeah,
David.
Professor. I'm here. David.
Okay. Brianna. Angelica. Gian. Nicholas. And Wenjin. Okay. All right. So for the rest of the class, we will discuss the remaining material and diversity. And so I had gotten started and I was talking about the difference between surface level and deep level diversity. And basically, your book talks about, and we talked about prejudice already. Prejudice is an attitude that represents broad generalized feelings toward a group, and it involves maintaining an unequal hierarchy. That definition of prejudice kind of makes it a little bit more specific. It's how the word is used, in speech. But I mean, the real meaning of prejudice, if you go back to the original definition in the dictionary, it just means any kind of bias. So, I have a prejudice against red meat, or I have a prejudice against a bad theater or something like that. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's a hierarchy, but in general, that's what we mean when we talk about discrimination law and stuff like that. As well, stereotyping means judging people based on someone's perception of the group that the person belongs to. And you don't want to do it when that reflects prejudice or it unfairly excludes people. We all make generalizations, like I just did myself when I said that the lawyers at the top firms are the best writers. I mean, that's a stereotype. You know, presumably there could be a lawyer at the best firm who's a lousy writer, but you know, we all do this. And that's what, you know, in statistics, when you take a mean, that's basically what you're doing. You're taking a stereotype. You're saying like the average American that has less, more individualism, less collectivism than the average Asian. Okay, you can show that statistically, but it's also a stereotype because, you know, there are plenty of Americans who aren't individualistic. So, you know, we all stereotype to some degree. The point is that you don't want to unfairly stereotype. That's the problem. And people do all the time. And that's where, you know, you get into problems with discrimination. The idea of implicit bias is that we all have these prejudices, and often they're embedded in our psyche, and we're not aware of them. And that's fair enough. And the reason, well, we should all try to be fair. I mean, that's just good ethics. But the reason we should be worried about this is when we're managers, that it can result in discrimination, and these unfair patterns can result in some groups being disadvantaged. And I think I spoke last time about disparate impact versus disparate treatment. In HR, this is very, very important distinction. So disparate impact is where you treat one party differently from another because of some characteristic that's you're not allowed to do. So you don't hire someone because of their race. That would be disparate impact. I'm sorry, disparate treatment. So basically, if you say, I'm not going to hire this person because they're from New Jersey, that's against the law because Title VII of the Civil Rights Act prohibits discrimination on account of national origin. So if you come from New Jersey, your national origin is New Jersey, and so you can't be discriminated against for that reason. Does that occur in real life? Of course. You know, if you know you go to a small town, they'll say, well, we're going to hire someone for the town clerk job who came from the town. We're not going to hire someone from out of state. And that can easily happen in private companies too. The Civil Rights Act affects employers with more than 15 employees. So if it's a small business, you don't got to worry. Like if you just hire family members and there's 10 employees and they're all in the family, that's not an issue. But if it's got, you know, any size company, you got to be conscious of that. And so disparate treatment is where you treat people in one category. Like one time there was a case where there used to be this bar called Hooters that had like female waitresses, and you know, guys would go there to admire the female waitresses, I guess. And a guy wanted to work there, and he sued for sex discrimination, that I should be allowed to work there because they're hiring on the basis of gender. And that actually, well, he lost that case. So in other words, if there is a business related reason for not adhering to the Title VII, so if if you're hiring an actress for a part in a movie, it's not sex discrimination. And you can think of a lot of examples like that. So disparate treatment is justified by business necessity. That would generally be the case. Now, disparate impact is a little different. It's where there is an objective selection criterion in hiring. So, for example, you base hiring on an objective measure, like do you have a high school diploma or don't you? But if there is a significant difference in rates of passing the test, so if more Group A have a high school diploma than Group B, that's called disparate impact. So the two tests are like, if the proportion of one needs to be at least 80% of the proportion of the other. So if you've got 100 of one group and 80 of another group, that's not disparate impact. But if you have 79, it is. So if the proportion is less than 80%, then that is a measure of different disparate impact. What you would then have to do if you're a company, what the company would then have to do is to prove that the criterion is real, that it's actually valid, and that it's validated against job performance. So if you can show that a degree requirement correlates with job performance, then the claim of disparate impact is overcome. All right, so it's up to the companies to prove that the effects of their selection method are legitimate. Surprisingly, not all companies do those studies. Not all companies look at, are our selection methods valid? The term that personnel psychologists use for this is a validation. And so they're open to lawsuits, and there are quite a few lawsuits in America for these kinds of issues. It's fairly common. And you would think that, if I say a number like 50,000 a year or something like that, I'm just looking at, maybe I can easily find, well, they get currently, the EEOC gets currently about 80,000 complaints. Not all of those become lawsuits, and usually it's not the EEOC that brings the lawsuits, it's the private individual has to pay for a lawyer. They only bring 100 or 200 a year. The agency, they mostly say no to the lawsuits because they have limited resources. But private individuals bring thousands of lawsuits each year. And if they're getting 80,000 complaints, there's probably at least 20 or 30,000 lawsuits. And so it's a big area for litigation. And rather amazingly, I when I study this, it continues to be a puzzle why the firms don't validate their selection methods. I think a lot of it reflects on the quality of the HR departments, because I once did a quick survey. I was a little disappointed at the response rate, so I didn't pursue it. I was interested how few firms even responded, and these were big firms, and of the ones who did respond, a lot of them didn't even know what validation was. I mean, they hadn't even heard of it. So, and these were HR people who was responsible for it. So basically, I think part of the problem is that the HR people don't know what they're doing. I hate to say, those of you interested in HR, I'm sorry to be negative about it. I worked in it myself for 9 years, and I would say in many cases they simply don't know what they're doing, and a lot of the issues that people are constantly complaining about would go away if they just did their jobs, which is that they made sure that hiring is done objectively and not, based on, do you like somebody? What they do is they interview you and they say, what do you want to be in 5 years? And they ask you a few questions like that. You're going to go through it, and basically they're determining whether they like you or they think you're fit. And the simple truth is that everyone's got just like me bias. It's a common, widespread thing. They use fancy language about it, like implicit bias. It's just like people who are like themselves. There's nothing new about it. You see it everywhere, and so they're not going to necessarily hire the best qualified one. I mean, would you, if you were hiring, would you have hired Stephen Hawking? He's not able to function in ordinary way, and it's like you see a guy like that, and it's shocking, and you say, I'm not gonna hire someone. I'm sure they're fine, but it's too shocking for me to deal with, and people don't hire people with disabilities. But the fact is that Stephen Hawking deserved his fame. He was great, he's amazing. And so basically we all discriminate. And the way around that is objectivity. And yet the firms don't want to do it. I think, protesting about how you believe in diversity is to me a lot less convincing than just doing your selection in an objective way and not discriminating, and yet that's not done. So I also wanted to talk about, and this is, I think, a useful thing to know about. I don't know how practical Hofstede's material is, but he wrote this book called Culture's Consequences back in the 70s, I think. And he originally talked about 4 cultural dimensions, and your book adds one. I guess he might have added one later on, but in the original book it's 4, and your book talks about 5. But in any case, the 5 dimensions, and the way he did this, he did a study. He worked for IBM, and they were in like 130 countries. It was a big firm, so they had I forget the exact number, but it was in the tens of thousands of employees, maybe even 100,000 employees. So they were in like 100 countries. He had like 100,000 employees. So he did this huge study of like cultural attitudes, and he got a huge number of responses. Of course, a problem with that is that IBM people are not like other people. They're more affluent, for one thing, and they have a certain profession, so they have certain personality traits, that working with computer systems, so that that kind of, they're probably a little smarter than the average person, things like that. So basically, it's not the most objective sample, but it's not random, I mean to say. But he did find some interesting things. That he used a methodology called factor analysis, which finds the linear relationships that bring sets of points closest together, but separate the points the most. So it does 2 things. It's basically finding patterns that separate the points. So you can say that they're determined by different factors. And so what this does is it tells you what differentiates characteristics. The method of factor analysis uses a lot in psychometrics. And so basically, he found 4 dimensions, and then your book adds 1. Or he later added one, I should say. I read the original book. I didn't see his later work. So basically, the 5 dimensions are power distance, which means authoritarianism, how authoritarian is the culture, how by authoritarian or power distance, what we mean is how accepting of power differentials is the culture. In Great Britain, they've got less power distance than in Germany. Okay. When I was in Munich for a week and or maybe 2 weeks, and I met this rock musician and we were talking, and the way they were in the subway there, you don't pay the toll. What you do is you buy a card, and then the card is good for a certain ride. And if somebody taps your shoulder and say, "Can I see your card?" then you show the card, but most of the time they don't. And he told me, "Oh, I haven't bought one of those cards in 6 months," he says. So this is like the sort of individualistic mindset that's more Anglo, whereas the Germans are a little bit more collectivist, and they wouldn't think in terms of violating the laws readily. So power distance is like how respecting of authority the culture is. In America, we tend not to think that people should have power over other people, whereas in other cultures there is a tendency. Individualism versus collectivism. So some cultures tend to value the family most, or the group. If you look at Japanese or Confucian influenced cultures, they tend to be more collectivistic, whereas Protestant influenced Western cultures are probably the most individualist culture. So America, with this Calvinist influence in its founding, it tends to be far more individualistic than, say, other European influenced or European countries. Australia would have a lot in common with the US, and basically, as you go into Eastern Europe, it tends to be somewhat less individualistic, and Asia is somewhat less individualistic. So basically, if you look at Japan versus the US, Japan is very collectivistic. And so, if you look at the movies, one of the most famous Japanese movies is by Kurosawa. We're actually going to watch Rashomon. But another one, probably his most famous movie, is The Seven Samurai. And what the movie is about, it was later remade into The Magnificent Seven. And there was a remake, I think, of The Magnificent Seven. So you can watch one of those. It's maybe a little bit more accessible. But The Seven Samurai is an incredible movie. It's like one of the best movies ever made, without a doubt. And it's about how the samurai, so they're going to fight the outlaws, but a lot of the movie is about how the group is formed. Whereas in most American Westerns, it's not the group, it's the individual gunslinger. Whereas in this great Japanese movie and many other ones, the group plays a bigger role. So this collectivist mindset is a cultural value. So far I've talked about power distance, individualism versus collectivism. The third one, masculinity versus femininity, has a lot to do with how task-oriented the culture is. So some cultures tend to have more masculine values and task-oriented, and other cultures tend to be more relations-oriented and have more emotional content. So this would be the third one. And the fourth one, uncertainty avoidance, is how risk-oriented cultures are. Some cultures tend to be afraid of risk or dislike risk, and other cultures come closer to risk neutral. And so how risk averse is the culture? And so the four in the original book, power distance, individualism versus collectivism, masculinity versus femininity, and sometimes that's called, to avoid sexism, it's sometimes called task versus relations orientation. And the fourth one, uncertainty avoidance, is risk orientation. And then your book adds a fifth one, long-term versus short-term. Some cultures are more long-term thinking. I think of the Japanese and Chinese, very much so. And other cultures, like us, are much shorter-term thinking. That's been a disadvantage that the US has suffered from. The sixth dimension that your book mentions is indulgence versus restraint. How self-indulgent people are. So basically, those are all dimensions that have been identified. In my other class, we talk about another model by Trump and Ayers, which goes into similar dimensions, but he adds things like a locus of control and some other ones. So, there are probably a number of ways to differentiate cultures, but the point is that there are cultural differences. So, at the same time that we don't want to stereotype and misunderstand people, we also should be aware that there are certain patterns. You could argue, and I think correctly, that within a country there are probably greater differences than across the means across countries. So, even you say that Americans are individualistic. There are a lot of Americans who aren't individualistic. So, there's a lot of variability within each country. So it's dangerous to stereotype, but you can't talk about national differences. And, these things are cultural in part. Cultural tightness and looseness refers to the extent to which there are clear, pervasive norms, and to the extent to which that there's no tolerance for deviation. And I think in liberal societies such as ours, liberal meaning that we are governed by the rule of law and people are otherwise free to do as they wish, there tends to be less cultural tightness, more cultural looseness. In countries that have more authoritarian systems and have the cultural trait of authoritarianism, you're going to see much stronger norms and less tolerance for deviation. People can have cultural intelligence. That's someone's ability to effectively function in diverse cultural settings. Unfortunately, Americans have not been good at learning other cultures. I once had an IBM person come to one of my classes when I taught near their headquarters in Westchester. I used to teach up there for a while. And she told us that I asked her, what kind of training did you get? And she had been in like 10 different countries, all over the world. And I asked her, what training did they give you when you went to South Africa, when you went to Japan? And she said, none. They gave us no training. Okay, so she didn't know the language, she didn't know anything about the culture. And the Japanese, in contrast, do get a lot of training when they come to the US or they come to another country. So they've been better at international management and handling expatriate managers than we have. And cultural intelligence can be improved, and of course you can learn other countries' cultures. And I think part of that would necessarily be understanding the language. So you need to, if you're going to do business in another country, you probably should be learning at least a few words of the other language. The idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion is that, we should celebrate differences and provide access and equal opportunities to everybody. And one last point, we're almost out of time, is that we should be aware that, okay, someone just came in here. We should be aware that of a few things. First of all, contact with other cultures leads to better tolerance. So the more people from diverse backgrounds who interact, the less prejudices they have. The worst prejudices are from people who never meet the people they feel they dislike. So, you know, interaction improves tolerance and you know, getting along and so on. Common in-group identity is where people focus on what unites them rather than what divides them. So in other words, I think I mentioned in the last class a movie I was watching, I never finished watching it, about physicists, and you can really see in that movie that their identities as physicists vastly outweighs any cultural differences. It's absolutely irrelevant, the cultural differences, you know, and they devote their lives to physics. And so if you're a physicist, you have more in common with a physicist from a completely different culture than you do with people from your own culture. Lastly, the best way to handle diversity is to treat everyone as an individual. And that seems to me to be fairly self-evident. I'm a pretty strong individualist. I believe in freedom and individualism. And I think the most efficient method of HR, and also the most fair, is to view everyone as special. Everybody's different. And so you need to respect them as individuals. Okay, so that said, we're out of time, and have a good afternoon, and I will see you on Monday, and I'll send your assignments around.
Professor,
Yes.
Professor, I joined the class a bit late. Can you give my attendance, please?
Oh, you didn't get called for attendance?
Yeah.
Hold on.
I was late.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, wait. Let me get your name. Hold on. Don't go away. I put away the attendance sheet already. So, okay, and who are you?
Samima Akhtar.
Okay, Samima, okay. Okay, gotcha.
Professor,
Yes,
I think did you say my name twice?
Nicholas Neglia. I called you, didn't I? I seem to remember calling you. Yeah,
Yes, I think you said my name again. I don't know if you
I
didn't mark it.
did, it was a mistake. I
Oh,
apologize.
okay.
The person's name is next to yours. I should have called Aquino. So, no matter.
Okay. Have a good day.
You too. Anyone else?
I have a question, Professor.
Go ahead.
So for the discussion boards, right? Let's say we like read ahead. Are we allowed to do them like ahead of time, just so that we're like
Of
ahead of
course.
schedule?
Yeah, you can do them whenever you want.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Just,
Have a
I
great
mean,
weekend.
do them by the due date. Don't do it after the due date, but ahead of time you can. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, of course. I mean, like, don't submit them late, but
Yeah.
we can do the ones that are like doing like the month coming up.
Yeah. That's all fine. If you want to do it like 2 weeks in advance, it's fine.
All right. Thank you. Have a great weekend.
You too. Take care.
You too.